Jim Harbaugh graces the cover of ESPN, the magazine's college football preview edition. Inside the pages, we highlight the budding dynamic between Harbaugh and Urban Meyer. We'll also give you our top 25. This time, the Big 12 has a couple of representatives in the top 4. And why the Oklahoma is more than just a football drill. Plus, we'll look at a couple of Baylor behemoths who hope to lead the Bears to glory in 2015. Penn State's Christian Hackenberg had a down season, so why is his draft stock so high? We'll explain. And the biggest question of them all, can anybody stop Ohio State? It's all inside the pages of ESPN, the magazine.
Welcome to ESPN the Magazine College Football Preview, presented by Dish.
ESPN's College Football Preview Edition is now available on newsstands. Michigan's Jim Harbaugh on the cover, and Harbaugh featured prominently in our cover story as well. Natural Born Rivals is the name of the story. Brett Forrest wrote the cover story and highlights a new era in one of the great rivalries in all of college sports, Michigan and Ohio State. Anish Shroff alongside Brett Forrest, the author of our cover story. Chris Lowe covers the SEC for ESPN.com. Tom Luganbill, ESPN's National Director of Recruiting. Brett, I want to start with you. It's been a bizarre offseason for Jim Harbaugh. Takes his shirt off at a satellite camp. There was the weird interview with Colin Cowherd, some strange tweets going to Judge Judy. All this, is this just the zen of Harbaugh, or is this some sort of calculated ploy?
None of it's contrived, and I'll tell you why that is. Harbaugh is so confident that he's beyond impulse control. I think what we're seeing is just his impulses coming out. You mentioned the Cowherd interview. How does that get Harbaugh to his main goal, which is to build a winning program at Michigan? I don't think it does. I think that sends the wrong message. But what it tells us is that Harbaugh is out there just doing whatever feels right to him. I'll also say that what's more contrived, being controlled in an interview that you're not having fun with, or just letting it all hang out. I think that's what we're seeing with Harbaugh.
Tom, what's Ohio State's reaction to Jim Harbaugh's arrival at Michigan?
I think there were probably a lot of other guys that the fan base wished that maybe Michigan would have pursued and hired. I know specifically from Urban Meyer's standpoint, this is a guy that he respects tremendously. Take away the rivalry. All right, he respects this guy for two reasons. Number one, he can evaluate personnel. So he knows the caliber of player that he's going to be up against in recruiting is going to be strong. Number two, he's a grinder. So the work ethic that he brings to the table is something that Michigan sorely needs, especially when it comes to recruiting and all the things go along with representing the program. And that's something that I think Ohio State fans, if you're really truly into a rivalry, you welcome that, because right now this hasn't been a rivalry.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I mean, Urban Meyer loves rivalries. I mean, when he was at Florida, he kept a chart in the locker room, their record against all their rivals, Florida State, Tennessee, Georgia. He knows, and I think with Harbaugh being at Michigan now, that makes this rivalry whole again. It makes the Big Ten whole again. And I think without a question, even though maybe some of the Ohio State fans would like to have seen somebody other than Harbaugh there, Urban Meyer can't wait to get this thing going.
Brett, we're always going to bring this back to Woody and Bo. That's the benchmark for this rivalry. What is the dynamic between Urban and Jim?
Right now there is no dynamic. They don't even know each other. They met for the first time in May at the Big Ten headquarters for a coaches meeting. They met again this summer at a recruiting camp outside Detroit. They don't know each other. And that's really what our story is about. You have two guys having to build a personal rivalry within the construct of an institutional rivalry. But they do have something interesting in common. They were born in the same hospital.
You know, it's interesting you talk about how they don't know each other. When Urban Meyer left the University of Florida. He came in here and did some television broadcasting with us. And we were sitting right in this very studio, looking right at that monitor. And we're doing a film breakdown of Andrew Luck as he's going into his senior season. And we start getting into a conversation about some of the things that was making Andrew Luck special. And Urban just leans over and he goes, "You watch. Alex Smith will have the best season in his NFL career this coming fall," okay? And I said, "Well, why do you think that is?" He goes, "Because that guy coaching him knows what he's doing." And that guy being Jim Harbaugh. And so that in and of itself kind of tells you the respect of the rivalry. May not know, he knows what he's all about. And I think that's really healthy for this thing.
Chris, you cover the SEC. What can a coaching rivalry like this do for a conference?
Well, you look just at the SEC, some of the best rivalries have been strong personalities at the school. You go back to Bear Bryant at Alabama, Pat Dye at Auburn. Now that rivalry in itself is outstanding. But when you have two strong personalities and it's at two schools like this going at it, and both these guys subtly love to sort of twist the knife when they get a chance. Go back to the Florida-Georgia game when Urban was there. Georgia had won the year before. Urban was upset. Georgia players pouted in the end zone the year before. The next year, they're winning by 40 points. He calls 2 timeouts in the last minute of the game. So without question, and go back to what Harbaugh did with Pete Carroll when he got to Stanford, you know, predicting that, hey, he may be gone in a year. So both these guys in their own way love to sort of twist the knife.
Do you find it interesting? Here's Ohio State. They're at the apex right now. Urban Meyer's first season, they go undefeated. They come within a quarter of playing for a championship in his second season, win it all this year. Does Jim Harbaugh have Columbus uneasy? Maybe that's not the right word, but I don't know what is the right word there.
I think he has the most football-minded people in Columbus uneasy, and I'll tell you why. We know that Ohio State has gone 11-2 in the last 13 meetings with Michigan, but in the period just prior to that, Michigan went 12-3-1. What was the difference? Lloyd Carr was nearing the end of his career, took his foot off the gas, and we had a new dynamic coach in Columbus in Jim Tressel. It could happen, and I think the people at the top of the Ohio State program are very wary.
It's incredible. Michigan hasn't played a game yet under Jim Harbaugh. He has already brought considerable buzz to this program. Natural Born Rivals is the story. Brett Forrest is the author of that story. You can read it in the upcoming issue of ESPN the magazine. Brett, we appreciate you joining us. Ryan McGee with more on the Harbaugh-Urban Meyer dynamic.
It's a rivalry battle. It's war. Let's party, Columbus.
Harbaugh and Meyer, Jim and Urban, both 51 years old, both so accomplished. Heck, both were born in the same hospital in the border town of Toledo, just 6 months apart. Now both are back where they always wanted to be,
on the sidelines of their beloved programs, calling the shots.
Urban Meyer grew up wearing scarlet and gray, a Buckeye fan, who cut his collegiate coaching teeth in Columbus. Jim Harbaugh donned maize and blue. Number 4, standing under center in the big house and in the horseshoe. Meyer specializes in calm, maintaining an even strain. Harbaugh likes to focus on disrupting the focus of others.
Amazingly, they'd never formally met until this year.
This November, they'll meet again in Ann Arbor, the head coaches of their favorite teams. The 10-year war, round 2. That's what we want this to be, right? That's what we've been missing, right? That electricity along US Route 23 that's been dimmed just a little since 1978.
All due respect to Bruce, Cooper, Tressel, and Fickle. No disrespect to Moeller, Carr, Rich Rod, or Hoke.
But no matter what the combination, they were never Woody and Bo. Neither are Jim and Urban, but they could be. They might be. And right now, the potential of those two finally together, yet so deliciously far apart, it already has us itching to fast forward to the end of fall, to see, finally, Harbaugh and Meyer.
Ohio State beat Michigan just twice between 1988 and 2000. The Buckeyes have since flipped the script over the last 11 years. The Wolverines with just one win against Ohio State since 2004. The Buckeyes have been especially dominant on the ground during this stretch, averaging more than 220 rush yards per game against their rival since '04. Still to come, the Big 12 may have been left out last year, but our predictions forecast a complete turnaround for the conference. We'll take you inside the Oklahoma drill, when it started, what it accomplishes, and if it still has a place in football's future. Plus, a pair of Grizzlies in the trenches is one of the reasons we're bullish on the Bears. Why a pair of behemoths are poised to lead Baylor to the playoff. And Christian Hackenberg threw more interceptions than touchdowns last season. So why are we talking about him as a potential #1 overall pick?
ESPN The Magazine College Football Preview is presented by Dish's new 2-year TV price lock with no hidden monthly fees. It's just $49.99 every month for 2 years.
It's primal, it's savage, it's a rite of passage, and it tests feats of strength in a way that Festivus never could. It's the Oklahoma drill. And ESPN The Magazine's college football preview issue traces the history of an almost 70-year-old tradition that began in Norman. And Ishraff with Tom Luganbill. For those that don't know, what is the Oklahoma drill?
Essentially, it's a point of attack drill. And this is an isolated portion of it, but essentially it's a reflection of something that could happen, run or pass, during every single play on the field, whether it's a receiver blocking a corner with the back coming around him, whether it's a fullback leading up onto the linebacker at the point of attack. It's a point of attack isolated drill in a very narrow confined space.
What's its purpose?
The purpose of the drill reflects just about every aspect that you have to have in your arsenal to be successful. Pad level, leverage, hand usage, mental and physical toughness, lower body strength, all of the things that are part of the football dynamic at the line of scrimmage are reflected in this drill. For me, this drill is about what the game is: toughness, physicality.
You're trying to gauge a player's toughness.
Absolutely, and when you train that way and you develop that way and there's an expectation to play that way, next thing you know, you've got a pretty tough football team.
No way around it. It's a violent drill.
It's a violent game.
Head injuries and concussions have gotten more attention over the years. Given all that, does this drill still have a place in football?
Absolutely, it's got a place in football. And one of the things about this drill, and if you notice some of those clips that we just showed, this drill can be a tremendous teaching opportunity for proper form tackling, proper head and neck alignment when you are butting up at the point of attack. There are great teaching and technique and fundamental opportunities here that this drill, in my opinion, whether it was developed in Norman or it was developed by somebody else who hadn't exposed it, long before then, it epitomizes the game of football, particularly at the trenches. And as we talk about each and every year, the trenches are where the game's won.
Yeah. Let's go to Norman. Bob Stoops, head coach for the Sooners, 8-5, embarrassed in the bowl game last year. What sort of pressure is on Bob Stoops going into this year?
If you're Bob Stoops and you're the Oklahoma Sooners, this is the year that you love. If you look at the last 5 seasons for the University of Oklahoma, this has not been a team that has responded well, Anish, to preseason hype and to expectation level. In fact, you go back the last 5, 3 of those 5, I believe, Oklahoma was in a position where they were ranked preseason number 5 and did not finish higher than 10. In the other 2 seasons, Anish, where they weren't predicted to be in the top 5 preseason, they finished within the top 5. This is the type of year that Bob Stoops loves. Let everybody talk about Oklahoma State. Let everybody talk about Baylor. Let everybody talk about TCU. We'll just be Oklahoma. We'll just be the University of Oklahoma and play our best football without anybody paying attention.
They brought in a new offensive coordinator, Lincoln Riley, that air raid offense coming to Norman. You mentioned Baylor. The Bears are now in a position where they're one of the favorites in the Big 12, and we featured the Bears in ESPN The Magazine's College Football Preview Edition. Laquan McGowan, 6'8", 403 pounds. He is a tight end. Remember, he had a touchdown in the bowl game. Sean Oakman, 6'9", 280-pound D-end. A little different physique than McGowan.
Hey, I had that bowl game, Anish, and let me tell you right now, when Baylor arrives at the stadium, there's two guys that get off the bus first, and it's those two.
Two guys with extremely different physiques, but it also speaks to maybe a misconception about this team. We think of Baylor, we think of fast, we think of finesse. This year, especially in the trenches, this is a pretty physical team.
It's a physical team, and it's also a team and a program that's probably taken a little bit longer to recruit the type of player and develop the type of player that they need to have in the Big 12 on the defensive side. The offensive part of the equation was a little bit more of an easy transition. You bring an offensive-oriented coach with a proven track record, proven history of having a great scheme, high-flying circus act, and that defense gets overshadowed a little bit. That might have helped the development.
Is this the year we talk about Baylor's defense?
This is the year that Baylor is best equipped to handle a Samaje Perine, handle a physical runner at the point of attack, where for the first time in maybe a long time, Baylor isn't outmanned in the trenches. They're actually a team that can stack up with you, and that's something that's really important to the fortunes of this team, considering we know how explosive they are on offense.
You know, we'll see McGowan again in the passing game. The question is going to be the guy throwing the ball to him. Seth Russell will likely be the quarterback in Baylor. Is this now basically a plug-and-play offense where it doesn't matter who's the quarterback in that system because the last three guys have all done a pretty good job?
It's a fair assessment, and I don't think it's just applied to the Baylor Bears. It's this system and this scheme going back to Mike Leach, to Mike Gundy, to Dana Holgerson, Kevin Sumlin. We know Art Briles. You look at all those programs, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, Baylor. They've all had tremendous success going from one 3,800-yard or 4,000-yard passer, throw for 44 touchdowns a niche, and then that guy moves on, and the next guy just plugs in. Got to have great players around you, no doubt.
And they do.
No doubt, but it is the ideal plug-and-play scheme. Hasn't proven to be too effective at the National Football League, as we're not seeing a lot of those guys pan out, but whatever they're doing at this level, it's working.
Only bugaboo that I can find with Baylor is the schedule, especially non-conference. You're now one of the big boys. That's the reality of college football now. Why won't they play a big boy schedule?
That's a good question. Now, not to defend Baylor, but I would apply this to a lot of programs. So many of these schedules are made 5, 6, 7 years
But
in
even
advance.
if you look ahead from now until 2022,
no, there's no question. And
Duke is the only Power 5 team on their schedule.
Yes, and that was going to be my next point. But you can develop going forward, and you can make those changes. And it's really interesting to me that you don't make that shift knowing that you don't have a conference title game right now. So that's one other difficult opponent that you don't have to play.
So there's no margin for error, essentially.
Well, we found that out last year.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Bowlesby tries to come out and say, well, I wish we would have known. Well, you are the only one who didn't know, because we all talked about it in the preseason about not having a conference championship game with that type of regular season schedule in the non-conference coming up and biting you, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, essentially 12-0 or bust for Baylor then.
There's no. I think that's a legitimate notion.
By the way, Oakman and McGowan. Let's last question on Oakman. What's this kid's ceiling?
I think that Oakman needs to start playing as consistently as good as he looks in a uniform. And I say that, there's a lot of guys that are like that. Daquan Bowers at Clemson
You guys
was
look
like
better,
that.
yeah.
Daquan Bowers was like that a little bit, and then all of a sudden that last year he put it all together, and the production started equating to what his physical stature was. That's the next evolution.
There's a picture in the magazine with Oakman doing a workout, and while I was leafing through it, my wife saw it, and she goes, those his arms? Hang on, go back to that.
Hey, let me tell you something. In the bowl game last year, in the Cotton Bowl, he came out, and I don't even think he had his shirt tucked underneath his shoulder pads. I just think they sewed it that way.
Right.
You know, because he literally looks like he's got painted on abs.
That's going to change this year, by the way. That's going to change this year. He can't show off his abs anymore. He's going to have to tuck that jersey in.
Well, then I hope he plays. Everybody's good.
All right, Baylor, a couple of behemoths on offense and defense. As we mentioned, the physiques are vastly different, but those two, part of the reason that there is a lot of buzz around Waco this year, as there was in years past. And in the coaches poll, Baylor 4th in the preseason poll, TCU 2nd. We like to call that irony.
Yeah, exactly, huh?
Here's the best part of ESPN, the magazine's preseason top 25. We're going to give you the names of everyone who voted in the poll, in case you want to call them out on Twitter. Equal opportunity haters. And why a down season positively impacted Christian Hackenberg's draft stock. It's all ahead.
welcome back to ESPN The Magazine College Football Preview, presented by Dish.
Ohio State is on top of the mountain. They are the college football champions for the 2014 season.
For the third straight year, the defending national champion is ranked #1 in the preseason coaches poll. They like to make it easy. For Ohio State, it's the first time the Buckeyes are #1 in the preseason coaches poll since '06. No preseason #1 in the coaches poll has won the national title since USC back in 2004. So you saw how the coaches ranked the top 10. We're now going to show you how our experts ranked the top 25. The beautiful part about this is we're going to reveal the names of all 13 voters who participated in the poll. So if you want to send mean tweets or accuse them of hating your team, here are their names. Take a screen grab, pause your DVR. You can even maybe send some kind words if you agreed with them. So without further ado, here is ESPN Magazine's top 25. Surprise, surprise, defending champion Ohio State checks in at #1. They still have to pick a quarterback. TCU has a quarterback who might be the early season favorite for the Heisman in Trevon Boykin. The Horned Frogs left out of the college football playoff last year. Auburn, they were in the hunt for a playoff spot for much of last season, fell apart a little down the stretch. New defensive coordinator in Will Muschamp. Baylor returns a lot of firepower in 2015. New quarterback, though, in Seth Russell. They're fourth. Alabama at #5. The Tide also need to find a quarterback, as do the Ducks of Oregon, who are #6. USC and Michigan State are ranked 7th and 8th. The Trojans getting close to their scholarship limit capacity. Florida State at #9. Will it be Everett Golson who steps in for Jameis Winston? And Georgia, #10. The Dogs coming off another 10-win season. Let's look at 11 through 17. Clemson looking for a 5th 10-win season in a row. They'll also try to get over the hump and knock off Florida State. Stanford looking for a bounce-back year. They lost 3 games last year by just 3 points each. 3 SEC teams between 18 and 25. That makes 8 SEC teams in the preseason top 25, including Arkansas. Hogs finished last in the SEC West a season ago. Speaking of people who are on the committee that voted, who are all on Twitter, ESPN's college football reporter Heather Dinich, SEC reporter Chris Lowe, ESPN The Magazine's Ryan McGee. Ryan, let's start with the top of this poll.
Okay.
For the Big 12, there is a bit of cruel irony at play here. TCU and Baylor out of the playoff last year. They're in the projected field to start the year.
One true champion, right? No, listen, there's no doubting the talent of the two schools. The question is, will they be able to close the deal? And I think ultimately TCU has something that Baylor does not, and maybe the best quarterback in the country, and a guy who's reinvented himself over the last 3 years. And they also have a schedule that you can't question when you go in that committee room. And Baylor's problem is always going to be, as they ran into last year, Heather knows this better than anybody, is got to play somebody. And the perception is that they don't. So I think that TCU got the nod over Baylor just simply because of those two things.
Heather, with those two schools, is it realistic, though, without a conference championship game, with Baylor's non-conference schedule, that the Big 12 could actually have 2 teams in the playoff?
It could have been realistic last year if Florida State would have lost that ACC championship game to Georgia Tech. I mean, if Wisconsin would have given Ohio State a fight, we could be having an entirely different conversation right now. So I've been saying Big 12 fans and Big 12 coaches need not panic. It's definitely a possibility, but there's no margin for error for Baylor.
Yeah, I agree. I think for all the talk about getting 2 teams in from one conference, I think the Big 12 is as good a shape as anybody because Heather, the Pac-12 and the SEC are going to beat up on each other. Mm-hmm. Those teams, very likely, I think it's possible, the champion could have 2 losses. So if Baylor's sitting there with 1 loss or no losses and TCU's 1, I think the path for 2 teams from one conference much better in the Big 12 than it would be in the Pac-12 or the SEC.
What league is fighting conference perception the most at the outset of the year?
I think it's still the ACC. I still think people look at it as a two-team league, essentially Florida State and Clemson, although there may be a few teams this year who have something to say about that. But I think in that league in particular, you've almost got to go unbeaten to get into that playoff, unless there's a crazy scenario in other leagues.
Well, but to me, too, though, it's funny because what they are penalized for perception-wise, I think, honestly, is the model that helps you in this era, which is I think you're better off if you're a conference to be really good at the top, really terrible at the bottom, and just okay in the middle. That's the ACC. That's been the ACC for 30 years. Yeah. I think the problem that you have in a conference like the SEC or the Pac-12 is exactly what you're talking about, which is when everyone in the middle is pretty good. I mean, we were looking at that top 25. Arkansas, Tennessee, A&M, they cannot win the conference, but they can certainly ruin it for someone else. And I think that's what the Big 12 and the ACC have, is because they're so good at the top and they're not that good at the bottom, but they're just okay in the middle. And I think that's not a bad thing if you're a Power 5 league.
Mississippi State was ranked #1 in the country in November last year, okay, in the playoff poll. They're picked last in their division this year. Last. Yeah.
But, you know, it's interesting to me that Ohio State goes and wins the national championship, and the Big Ten is back. Yeah. You know, you've got Harbaugh, you've got Vegas saying that Michigan's going to win it all. And Florida State won the national championship. They played in the first year of the college football playoff, and yet the ACC, and I agree with this, is probably going to be the one that's left out or projected to be left out of the playoffs this year.
Yeah.
So that national title, I don't know how much it really means to the ACC.
Well, is the Big Ten back? I mean, we were clearly wrong on the Big Ten last year with the way they finished the season. Is this league back? Because let's face reality, they were down for a few years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think public perception right now is that it's Ohio State and Michigan State, and, you know, Paul Chryst is taking over at Wisconsin. He's got a great team there. But when you're talking about top to bottom depth of a conference, look, I'm an Indiana graduate. Doesn't go much further than Ohio State and Michigan State, okay? I mean, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of the depth, and it just, to me, does not compare to the Pac-12 or the SEC.
Ryan, can Notre Dame throw a wrench in the playoff this year?
They can throw a wrench in the playoffs just because of the schedule that they always play. You know, they touch on the Pac-12. Obviously, they're all over the ACC, but they've got their hands on a lot of different conferences and a lot of schools in those conferences. So, yeah, you know, the question now is what's their place in the world? And how much is that going to change over the next few years? Because for the first time ever, listen, I don't think anybody at Notre Dame cares what Gary Pinkel from Missouri says, but I think they start to care when it's Gary Pinkel and it's Frank Beamer and it's Paul Johnson and it's all these coaches starting to line up to more or less call them out about not being in the conference.
You've talked to a number of coaches, athletic directors this offseason as the college football playoff reporter. Notre Dame kind of does seem squeezed on the outside without that league championship game with the independent status, but in terms of clamor for expansion, what have you heard?
I've heard mixed reviews, to be honest. A lot of the coaches have said that the priority in judging these teams should be winning a conference championship, which lends the conversation to say, well, then why not have all Power 5 conference champions in this thing? And there are some coaches, though, if you ask Oregon's Mark Helfrich, he'll say, it took a toll on our players to play all those games. And to add more games, there should be some serious consideration there for the athletes. But I do think that it's only a matter of time before those talks generate some more substance to them. It's only the second year of a 12-year contract.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about the whole playoffs a little later on in the show. Chris, you cover the SEC. There were 8 teams in the SEC in that top 25. Of those 8, anyone maybe near the bottom of the polls that we're sleeping on or that has a chance to make waves this year?
Well, Texas A&M schedule, I think, is conducive to making a jump. I don't know that they've got the kind of personnel right now. LSU is a team, I think, they're, 14? They get their quarterback right. When you look everywhere else, defensively, offensive line, they've got Fournette back there in the backfield. I like their schedule, the first 7 or 8 games. Everybody talks about Auburn and Alabama in the West. Don't sleep on the Bengal Tigers.
I'm not talking about
You
Alabama.
got a sleeper?
Overall?
Overall.
Look, my top 25 is not very similar to that one.
Twitter take
So
note.
those darts that you were talking about, throw them at me because I like Stanford. Where's Oregon's quarterback? Can anybody tell me? Is he enrolled yet? I didn't think so. So that's kind of a question mark there. My sleeper is Stanford. I have them ranked pretty high. I think that they've got a
Ryan,
shot.
sleeper before we have to wrap up.
No, I think Stanford's the one. I go through the list. I had to write the deeper ESPN.com piece just last week. It'll be up any day now. And one of the things I kept going through was I can't believe this team is where it is.
Yeah.
I can't believe this. I think Clemson is a team that things have set up nicely for them. And again, it's a tough enough schedule that Clemson is a team that, again, they're one player away from being awful, but they're also one player away from being really good, and that's Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, if he stays healthy, Clemson's going to have a shot. Ryan McGee, Chris Lowe, Heather Dinich, we thank them for their time. More to do on ESPN, the magazine's college football preview show. Ohio State is expected to be a heavy favorite in every game this season. Who can potentially derail the Buckeye freight train? And why Penn State quarterback Christian Hackenberg may be the most polarizing talent in all of college football.
We were very honest with him. You know, we said, look, Christian, we can't go to a bowl. We can't compete for a championship, but you have a chance to make an impact here.
Hackenberg under pressure, throws, complete to Lewis, and Eugene Lewis, touchdown. What courage by Hackenberg. He knew he was going to get drilled.
Our concern wasn't with Christian Hackenberg, it was all the pieces of the puzzle around Christian.
Hackenberg hit and dropped, and the game is over. Bad protection by Penn State, and Ohio State gets the victory.
So many positive things falling into place for us right now. At Penn State being able to get the scholarships back, having an opportunity to go to bowl games.
Hackenberg into the end zone. It is caught. It's a touchdown, and Penn State wins it in overtime.
Christian Hackenberg coming out first overall in the NFL draft, according to McShay's mock draft.
And I'm excited about Christian's opportunities and what he's going to do this year.
Christian Hackenberg put up big numbers as a true freshman in 2013. Those numbers took a big dip in 2014. He was sacked twice as many times last season, more interceptions thrown than touchdown passes. The only Power 5 quarterback with more picks than Hackenberg's 15 last season, Jameis Winston, who ended up being the #1 overall pick. Hackenberg is profiled in the college football preview edition of ESPN, the magazine. The name of the article, Best Worst Season Ever. Kevin Van Valkenburg is the author of that story on Hackenberg. Andrea Adelson, ESPN's college football reporter. Hackenberg is still expected to go high in the draft despite the numbers from a season ago. You call him in that article maybe the most polarizing talent in college football. Why?
Well, I think there's a real divide between the way that fans kind of view him and the way that people who look at things in a sort of stats-based metrics way, and the way that the scouts are still looking at him. We're sort of trending back towards where NFL teams are kind of realizing that the dual threat quarterbacks, that's not a long-term solution for building a kind of consistent power team. And so pro-style quarterbacks like Hackenberg, big guys who can take hits in the pocket, they're still really coveted. So if he has a good year, it's still a really good chance he's going to be drafted high.
Why did his draft stock not really take much of a hit with the numbers he had last season?
I think when you got a guy who just has a powerful arm and who has been in the spotlight for a long time, people are going to sort of continue to sort of project him on potential. A lot of the NFL draft is always still about potential. You can put up huge statistics in college now, and they don't really have a lot of meaning because so much of the spread offenses have inflated statistics. But with Hackenberg, statistics aren't necessarily, they want to know, can he drive those throws to the outer half, the outer third of the field?
Andrea, how much of Hackenberg's struggles last season were on him? How much were on the people around him?
Well, there were a lot of issues around him. Let's be honest about it. The offensive line was a disaster. That might be putting it nicely when you consider how many times he was sacked. I was at the Michigan-Penn State game last season. He was sacked 6 times in that game, and that was right at the point of the season when things started turning in a bad way for Penn State. So you have to wonder whether a lot of that snowballed for him mentally, maybe not having the confidence in the guys in front of him. And then at receiver, they were so young, they were relying on freshmen. And a lot of those guys not running the right routes. And that impacted his confidence too. And they had no run game. So there were so many different factors that went into it. Of course, the quarterback has to take some blame as well. But the supporting cast last year, I don't think was the type that he needed to be able to give him the type of season that he thought he would have as a sophomore.
What's the supporting cast look like this year?
Well, a lot of those guys are back, so they're hoping because they have another year experience, everything is going to be better. They returned 4 starters on the offensive line who started 9+ games for them last year. They're excited about Deshaun Hamilton at receiver. Akeel Lynch is back at running back. They think he could be a 1,000-yard back. So now with these guys being a year older and Hackenberg as a junior now taking on that leadership role, this has to be his team. I think that confidence is high that they're going to have a bounce-back season.
Kevin, with a more experienced supporting cast, if Hackenberg's numbers don't improve significantly, will that impact his draft stock?
I think it's going to have to. I think that this is a big season in terms of, test of what he can do. There's a lot of pressure for him to play well, but he's been kind of born to be quarterback for a long time. He was a #1 recruit as a pro-style quarterback when he was in high school. Picked Penn State despite all the sanctions when a lot of people thought there's a real chance that he was going to bail. He spoke about that a lot and said, how much loyalty kind of meant to him. I wanted to set an example for his younger brothers.
What thought did he give to transferring?
I think there was some thought. I think he talked it over with a lot of people that he was close to. He wanted them to sort of, be a sounding board for him, but ultimately he said, I needed to choose Penn State because, both my parents were teachers, the academics were really important. He wanted to sort of go to a place where if it didn't work out football-wise, if he blew out his knee or somehow, that he would still feel really proud of having gone to there. And in a lot of ways, like Hackenberg's, he could go down as one of the more important recruits to ever play at Penn State because of committing to them and really being the rock that they needed in a really difficult time.
That's been the amazing thing about Penn State, how they've been able to weather this storm that few believed they could.
There's no doubt about it. And look at the way they ended last season with, I thought, one of the better bowl performances, one of the best bowl games that we saw against Boston College down to the wire. And I think that's a big reason why people have higher expectations going into this year. They ended on such a high note. And remember, they weren't supposed to be in a bowl game. This wasn't supposed to be a bowl team because of those sanctions that were first levied. And now they're a bowl team. And now people are expecting them to maybe get to 8 wins, potentially 9. And a lot of that is because Hackenberg is back now as a junior.
Kevin, when you talk to Hackenberg and those around him, what is he doing in the offseason to improve?
He went to the Manning Passing Academy this year. He went again to the Nike Elite 11 thing. He's just stronger. His core is sort of more powerful. He knows that he's going to have to stand up to some hits here and there. I saw him working so much on footwork, on mechanics. I think the thing that makes Christian someone that not only like James Franklin's really excited about, but the NFL's excited about is because he's really obsessed with mechanics. He's really trying to nail the footwork stuff, and that's so important as a pro-style quarterback. You have to nail a 7-step drop and have the ball come out and be able to read the safety when they're coming down and throw the ball to the outer thirds of the field. So I think the potential is there for Christian to have a really good season.
Yeah, right now on potential, our experts have him rated high in all the mock draft boards. Todd McShay's Scout Sync group has Hackenberg #1 on the big board for the 2016 NFL Draft. By the way, so much for the death of the Big Ten that we were all proclaiming last year. 1, 2, and 3, all from the Big Ten Conference. Kevin Van Valkenburg wrote the article on Hackenberg, best, worst season ever. You can find it in the current issue of ESPN, the magazine. Coming up next, we'll dive into the playoffs. Just how big of a favorite is Ohio State, and is playoff expansion on the way?
Welcome back to ESPN the Magazine College Football Preview, presented by Dish.
Elliott breaks free. Ezekiel Elliott gets a block and busts to the end zone. Now it's the eye of this national championship win.
Ohio State national champions for the 8th time as they defeat Oregon 42-20.
The game is over. The season is over. and college football playoff first national champion, the Ohio State Buckeyes. They are the college football champions for the 2014 season and go to the top of the college football world.
Vegas expects a similar scene to play out in 2015, according to the Westgate Las Vegas Superbook. Ohio State, a 5-2 favorite to win it all. TCU and Bama follow at 5-1. It's a colored coordinated quartet. Anish Shroff, ESPN's college football playoff reporter Heather Dinich, Andrea Adelson, that's magenta, right?
That's right.
Which matches Ryan McGee's tie.
That's right. We planned that.
We all planned this. Yeah, it worked out well. It worked out well for Ohio State last year, but Ryan, for this team to get back into the playoff, to win another championship, where do you see potential trappings during the course of the season?
But see, here's the thing. What did we learn in 2014? We don't know. You know, the best part about this game, it's why we all love college football, is because we don't know what's going to happen. Think about the best players, or the players that had the most impact of college football in the last 6-7 years. Guys we weren't even talking about sitting in these chairs in mid-August. We're talking about Cam Newton, talking about Jameis Winston, these names that guys that, or Johnny Football. And last year, it's Cardale Jones. So the question is someone going to pull something out of their hat?
That's not an answer. I'm still waiting for an answer.
No, but is someone going to pull something out of the hat along the way that we just don't know about? And honestly, it starts the very first weekend at Virginia Tech without your best defensive player on the field if you're Ohio State.
And as for Virginia Tech, I mean, this is a team that beat Ohio State last year, and I can tell you Bud Foster has been working since the end of the season, coming up with a new defensive scheme. Might not be the double eagle that they ran last year, but he's going to have something to throw at them, and it's in Blacksburg. So, you know, I think this is going to be a better Virginia Tech team, and why not Virginia Tech?
Heather, you're the curator of our college football playoff Polaroid. What are the key games early in the season that could impact the playoff picture?
Well, you know, one that might be overlooked is probably TCU and Minnesota, because that was a big non-conference game last year, especially considering how good Minnesota turned out to be, and the non-conference game that really separated TCU and Baylor. But also, I mean, you have to start with Wisconsin, Alabama, and that's where game day is going to be, and big test for Alabama right off the bat. So those are probably the two that jumped to my head right away.
Week 2, one stands out, Oregon, Michigan State.
Right.
This time the game will be in East Lansing.
That's right, yeah. And, you know, we were talking before the show about margin for error, and can Michigan State actually afford to lose that game and possibly, you know, win the Big Ten championship and be in the playoff? Absolutely they can.
What about the other way? If Michigan State were to win against Oregon, the only loss would come at Ohio State. Let's say if they are within 10 points there, they would not be eligible for a conference championship if the Buckeyes didn't have another loss in league play. That one would think that would give the Big Ten a solid case for 2 teams.
I would be very impressed and surprised if the Big Ten had 2 teams sitting here right now today. That's not the conference that I would pick to have 2 teams in the playoff.
Andrea, playoff expansion, do you feel that this is something that could happen in the next 5 years?
I don't see it happening in the next 5 years because this contract is going to be going beyond 5 years. I think this might be revisited at the end of this current contract. We've heard from a lot of people who've talked about 8, not only Baylor's AD, but also John Swofford in the ACC, saying in a perfect world, if we're only talking about football, 8 is a great number.
Ryan shaking his head.
4. And listen, I was the biggest proponent for 8, for 16, whatever. The most fun maybe I've ever had covering college football for one weekend was the conference championship game weekend of last year. Pat Forty, our old friend that was at ESPN as a Yahoo now, he and I looked at each other about midnight and went, this is awesome. And it went beyond, you know, here's what I say to people all the time is, you can't think of it as a 14 playoff, because the reality is, and Gary Patterson at TCU is the one that said this to me the first time, it starts at least with the conference championship games. It actually goes probably back to the rivalry weekend before that. You know, you're talking about this integrity of the regular season that Bill Hancock has just beaten us over the head with the BCS and with the playoff. To me, that's it. If you start expanding the field, you start watering down. So let's give it a few more years at least. If we have anywhere close to what we had during conference championship weekend of 2014, I'm in forever, because someone has to be left out.
Well, the SEC has to be left out.
Well, someone has to be left out, because if everyone gets a trophy,
but let's put
then
that
it doesn't matter.
hypothetical
But if
in
someone's
play.
left out, now we got drama.
Let's put that hypothetical in play. What if it is the mighty SEC that's frozen out? What if it happens in consecutive years?
Then, like I wrote, the playoff expands faster than Alabama writes checks to Nick Saban. That's it. Hello, wait. I mean, seriously, like, you know, that's what it's going to take to happen. And I think the same can be said for Notre Dame as well. It's going to take Notre Dame to be on the cusp of that and not get in to have Notre Dame join the ACC.
How would that go over if Notre Dame got in? Because that would, again, leave out a league champion from a Power 5, potentially 2 league champions. It would leave out 2 league champions from a Power 5, potentially, so maybe even more. How would that play?
Well, I think that it would be fine, depending on who the other 3 teams are. I think if you have the SEC champ, the Pac-12 champ, and then, you know, what if there's a Texas and an Oklahoma in there, and then you have Notre Dame? I mean, my goodness, that's a terrific playoff if you ask me. So I think that depends on the circumstances of it.
Not if you ask the ACC, of course, and we already started hearing from ACC coaches during the car wash about how, hey, why isn't Notre Dame joining a conference? Yeah. Why aren't they in our conference? They've got this quasi-scheduling situation with them. They're a part of their bowl partnership, and yet Notre Dame gets all the perks of being an independent while also getting a share of the ACC too in football anyway. So, you know, if the ACC gets left out, are people going to care? I don't know. People might just end up shrugging their shoulders and saying, we want to see Notre Dame anyway. But the fact remains that I think that you will start hearing from more ACC coaches if something like that were to happen.
What have we seen in terms of non-conference scheduling for the future now that we're in the playoff era?
Well, I've talked to a lot of athletic directors about that, and they are trying to beef up their schedules for the future because of the playoff. And a lot of people are knocking Baylor for their non-conference schedule. Art Briles told me that this is the last year that he thinks Baylor is going to be really questioned about their non-conference schedule. They've got Duke the next 2 years, and 6 of the next 10 years at least, they're trying to play 10 Power 5 opponents. So obviously they've got their 9-game. Their conference schedule and another Power 5 conference. So wow. It's important.
Yeah, which means more marquee games early in the season. Here's some dates to know. On November 3rd, the first rankings are released by the College Football Playoff Committee. December 31st, the Cotton Bowl and the Orange Bowl. Those will be the 2 semifinal bowls for 2015. And the College Football Championship game in Glendale, Arizona, set for January 11th. We thank Ryan McGee, we thank Andrea Adelson, we thank Heather Dinich for being part of our panel. ESPN The Magazine's college football preview show continues after this break.
ESPN The Magazine College Football Preview is presented by Dish's new 2-year TV price lock with no hidden monthly fees. It's just $49.99 every month for 2 years.
The magazine is on newsstands now. It is the college football preview edition of ESPN The Magazine. Make sure to check it out.